I'm Raquel Scheinerman from My Jewish Learning, and this morning we're joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. Go ahead, Rabbi Goldberg.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Excited to be here with you. It's been a couple of weeks or so. I don't know about you, but for me, anyways, I have a friend in synagogue, Steve. You might have a Steve also. Steve sits a couple rows behind me in synagogue, and it happens that he's doing Daf Yomi too, and he reads the My Jewish Learning daily email that goes out. So he came up to me in show last week and said, "Oh my God, how do you guys keep finding so many different ways to make oxes and goring oxes interesting?" I see some smiling and laughing on the faces on my Zoom. So I don't know if that's because Steve sits next to you in shul also, or you're feeling like Steve about oxes. Um, Oxes are the prototype for goring, and we have some time with them. It actually makes me wonder sometimes, when are the rabbis just talking about oxes because oxes can be violent animals, and when is it really that they're just a stand-in for all animals? And I think some texts are really talking about them more as an archetype, and some texts are talking about them as just oxes because they're oxen, I guess, is the right plural. They're just around. Anyways, we're going to also today talk a little bit about goring oxes and some other animals that are victims of goring. But before we do that, I have one short text that's just about people, and then we'll go back to the oxes. So if you want to do something about people, pay attention at the beginning, and if you're loving the oxes, we'll come back later. So a little introduction to the people story. This is one. There's a little story on 36A that I wanted to write about, but it couldn't fit into the piece that I wrote, and I just love it. So I thought I would bring it here. And on some level, it's a story about showcasing Talmudic logic. And there's a certain way that the rabbis think that sometimes we can catch ourselves thinking too, especially the more Talmud we've studied. But that applying Talmudic logic, while there's an upside to it, I guess, in the rabbinic world, because it shows that you're a good student of Talmud. Talmudic logic, though, I guess, is value neutral because just like the Force, you could use it for good, and you can also use it for evil, and we'll see what that looks like today. And I hope this story brings a little smile to your face. Oh, let me do this before I click over. I put the link to the slides in the chat just now, and here we go. And I'm going to start the slideshow. All right. Hanan the Wicked. Have you heard of Hanan the Wicked? The rabbis don't. There's some foreshadowing here. It's we don't even get to decide for ourselves if we like this character. Well, you could still decide if you like the character or not. But Hanan the Wicked, that's how he's known. Hanan the Wicked slapped a person, and they took him to court. He came before Rav Huna for judgment, and Rav Huna said to him, "Give him half a dinar. Give the person you slapped half a dinar." And the context of this is a conversation about currency and penalties, and half a dinar is the determinant value of certain penalties. Slapping a person is one of them, and we learned earlier that half a dinar is something, but it's not a lot of money. But he says, "Go give him half a dinar." Hanan the Wicked was really excited because he had a clipped dinar, which the commentaries say that somehow is a dinar coin that was damaged. It was bent, or it had a piece missing. Like he had a coin of currency, but it was used and damaged. He had a clipped dinar, a whole one though, and he said, "Oh my God." He wanted to give the person a half a dinar from it. He's like, "I have this clipped dinar. I have to pay this fine. This is how I can get rid of my broken coin, which I don't like having because I don't want a broken coin." But poor Hanan the Wicked, he could find no one who would take it from him, meaning he wanted to make change. I have this clipped dinar. It's broken. It's got I just don't like it. It doesn't sit well in my money bag or my pocket. I want to make change from it. I'm going to get 2 half dinars from my dinar, and I'm going to give half to this person I slapped, and then I'll pay my fine, and I'll be happy because I won't have to carry around this broken coin anymore. That'll be what a great day for Hanan the Wicked. But no one wanted to give him change. Has this ever happened to you? No one wanted to give him change. So here's what he did. Using good Talmudic logic, Hanan the Wicked gave the person another slap, and then he owed him 2 fines, 2 half a dinars. So for the fine, he used the whole dinar to pay the fine. This is an excellent application, I think, of Talmudic logic. How do I get rid of my whole dinar if I can't make change of it? Oh, I'll just slap the dude again, and then I'll have to pay 2 fines, and then I don't have to worry about getting change. But as I said at the beginning, um, not quite the way that the rabbis want to. This is this is using rabbinic logic for evil. But I think this. I saw some people on the screen smiling a little bit at this. It's good. He's got a Talmud Kapchan on the Wicked. He might have been a good student, but he didn't choose well. He could have just given the person an extra half a dinar, given it to Staka or something, but he got the extra slap in. Anyways, that's the little cartoon. They show cartoons sometimes before the movie to get you all. I don't know if they do that anymore. Before previews, there once upon a time there were cartoons before the movie. That's the cartoon before the movie. Here's the movie. Back to the oxes. All right, this week we have a lot about oxes, but there's a Mishnah in the middle of the week that we encountered that lays out some things about the goring ox. We've already learned that to become a muad ox. Muad means like you're established as goring, as opposed to a regular ox that isn't suspected of goring. You have to gore 3 times. If you're an ox and you gore 3 times, you move into a different category, and the fine for the damage you cause is doubled. And since you're an ox, you don't have to pay it. Your owner does. But 3 times is the magic thing, and 3 for the rabbis is a magic number of if you do something 3 times, it's intentional or it's a pattern, and that makes it something serious. And that's true of goring oxes. So after the 3rd gore, you become suspicious. You become a goring ox and not just a regular ox, a muad ox. You're suspected of goring, and the fine doubles. So here's what the Mishnah says. With regard to an ox as forewarned with regard to its own species, but is not forewarned with regard to other species. In other words, ox A gores oxes of its kind of ox, but other oxes it leaves alone. So it doesn't I don't know if there are dog owners out there, right? You have a golden retriever, it only attacks other golden retrievers and it leaves the rest of the dog population alone when you're out for a walk. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't have a dog, but that's the parallel here. Or an ox that's been forewarned for people, but not about animals, meaning an ox has gored people 3 times, but not animals. Or an ox that's forewarned about small species, but not specimens of a species, but not large ones. Oxes who gore small giraffes, but not adult giraffes. I don't know if there are a lot of giraffes around, but I like giraffes. So these are categories where an ox is gored 3 times, but somehow it's established a pattern for targeting. And the Mishnah tells us in these cases, if an ox gores the type of animal or a person with regard to which it was forewarned, it pays the full cost. If it gores an animal or a person with regard to which it is not forewarned, it pays half the cost. So here's what the rabbis are doing here in this Mishnah. You could say an ox is an ox and a violent ox is a violent ox. Now, if an ox goes and gores 3 times, no matter what the ox's victim is, that's a goring ox. Double the fine. Or you could say, well, we know oxes, and some oxes are particular. Certain species, certain animals, certain people get the ox bothered, and others are safe. So instead of just saying 3 attacks by an ox makes you a goring ox, the rabbis say, no, we can narrow this down. We can keep more oxes out of the goring category because we know oxes, and if one ox only goes after dogs, it shouldn't be forewarned for sheep or people or giraffes. So we're going to sort based on its pattern. So goring isn't a generic category, a general category. Goring becomes a specific category. The ox gets forewarned about the particular kind of a living thing that it gores. That's the first thing the Mishnah sets up here. Then they add something else about it, and I think my colleague Sue Parker Gelson wrote about this when this page came up. Rabbi Yehuda says they asked before Rabbi Yehuda, what would happen if what would the halacha be if the ox is forewarned with regard to Shabbatot but is not forewarned with regard to weekdays? What if an ox just gores on Shabbos and not on weekdays? Is that a thing? So before we divided up goring, an ox became goring or not goring based on like its victim. Here it's about time. Can an ox be warned about Shabbat but not weekdays? And Rabbi Yehuda says, yep, if it's warned for Shabbat, on Shabbat the owner pays full cost, and during the week it pays half. My first thought when I saw this was, well, maybe some oxes during the week when they're working are so busy at work they don't have extra energy to gore. But on Shabbat, when they're not working, they might have extra energy, and that might cause them to be violent. Some of the commentaries actually say, I love this, on Shabbat, when people are all dressed up nicely, the ox doesn't recognize its owners. So it thinks they're strangers because they're wearing their Shabbat clothes and not their weekday clothes. And so the ox will be likely to gore on Shabbat with people in Shabbat clothes and not the people in their work clothes. I'm not around oxen enough in my Shabbat clothes, so I don't know. But here the Mishnah is taking the principle from before that was about who the ox is goring and applying it to what if the ox shows a pattern that has to do with time, Shabbat or not Shabbat. And Rabbi Yehuda tells us, well, oxes can be, we could have an ox that becomes forewarned on Shabbat and not during the week. You can't, if the pattern is Shabbat, then that's how the ox is forewarned, and that is how we determine the fine. Awesome. That's the Mishnah. It shows us that for an ox, then when it becomes muad, can do so based on the patterns. Rabbis love patterns because patterns can become more complex. And so now, this is now, it's not, I guess this connects back. The Hanan, the wicked, we're going to use it might feel like it's a Talmudic slap, but no one's actually being slapped. But some people might groan at what's coming. We're going to apply the Talmudic logic. I don't think it's like application for evil like Hanan, but sometimes it's reductio ad absurdum, which no is not a Harry Potter spell. Sometimes we go towards maybe we could take it one step too far so that it becomes a little silly. You'll be the judge. So the sages taught, what if an ox saw an ox and gored it, and then subsequently it saw another ox and did not gore it, and then it saw an ox and gored it, and then it saw an ox but did not gore it, and then a third time it saw an ox and gored it, and then it saw an ox and did not gore it. In this case, the ox is rendered forewarned with regard to every other ox. So did you follow that pattern? The goring ox sees 6 other oxes. It gores the first one. It only gores the odd number oxes. It gores one. It doesn't gore. It gores. It doesn't gore. And it does it 3 times. And 3 is the magic number. You could argue in this case that this is not a goring ox because sometimes it gores and sometimes it doesn't. It should not be suspected of goring and therefore be forewarned against goring and have its fine doubled. Or you could say, no, there's a pattern in this. It gores and then it doesn't gore. It gores and then it doesn't gore. And if that's the case, this Breita says an ox can be forewarned for every other ox. I have an ox. It only gores odd sightings of oxes, not even ones. That is an acceptable pattern to make an ox forewarned. And if it gores, the odd ox who passes as opposed to the even ox who passes, I would have to pay the full damage. And if it gores an even ox, I would have to pay half the damage. And we can do this with multiple species too. If an ox, here's another Breita. If an ox saw an ox and gored it, and then saw a donkey but did not gore it, and then it saw a horse and gored it, Then it saw a camel and did not gore it. Then it saw a mule and gored it. Then it saw a wild donkey and did not gore it. In this case, is rendered. I might have skipped a line, but you get the point. It's alternate animals. Now it could be forewarned that this ox gores every other animal it encounters, and so it could be forewarned for every other animal. Notice here, similar to the last Breita had 6 oxes, and this is a whole zoo or barnyard or whatever you want to be, petting zoo. Same principle. The ox can establish its pattern. Here, the victim is just an animal. It's not the same species, and the ox gores every other time. This Breita says we can make that ox forewarned for every other animal that encounters, it's going to gore them. That's a pattern, and we're going to increase the fine. These things are in Breitot, and they're given as rules, like the Mishnah. The rabbis are a little sure of what they're doing here. Now come the questions. Are you ready? Fasten your seatbelts. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If an ox gored an ox, another ox, and a third ox, and then a donkey and a camel, with regard to what is it considered forewarned? Or, similarly, if an ox gored a donkey and a camel, and then an ox, and ox, what's the halacha? This one I made a visual aid for, maybe to help it out. Scenario A is on top, scenario B is on the bottom. We have our goring ox. In each case, the ox gored 5 times. So the first option one is it's the top of the slide. We treat the 3 ox gorings as one unit. Our ox gored an ox other oxes 3 times. That makes it forewarned. And then there was an isolated incident with the donkey, and then there was an isolated incident with the camel. Those don't count. We forewarn the ox again as a gorer of other oxes. Or you might say, maybe the first one ox goring is on its own, and the second ox goring is on its own. And then we have the ox gored 3 times, an ox, a donkey, and a camel. That's 3 gorings of multiple species. This ox should be forewarned against all species. And so what's at stake here? We only have 5 incidents of goring. And since the magic number is 3, 5 doesn't divide by 3, right? So we have 3 things that can be lumped together and 2 that are isolated incidents. And the question is, do we lump together the first 3 and only make this ox forewarned about other oxes? Maybe because that happened first, and so then we have a unit that matters, and the other 2 came after. Or since those last 2 gorings before we could decide about this ox were other species, maybe we'll take these 3 species together and say this ox is forewarned about everybody. So that's question number 1. And then there's a question number 2. You'll have to use, I'm relying on everyone to use their imagination to make the picture for this. This is a calendar though. What if an ox gores on Shabbat, and then on the next Shabbat, and then on the next Shabbat? So 3 consecutive Shabbatot, and then it gores on the next Sunday and Monday afterwards. Or what if the ox gores on Thursday, and then Friday, and then Shabbat, and then it takes the week off and does Shabbat and Shabbat? Same case that we had before, except here we have 5 incidents of goring. They each have 3 consecutive Shabbats, so we could make this ox forewarned about goring on Shabbat. But we also have 2 weekdays that are consecutive with Shabbat. So maybe this is an ox that gored 3 days in a row, and it might be forewarned for all of time. So is this a Shabbat goring ox, or is this an all-time goring ox? And is there a difference between scenario A at the top of the page and scenario B at the bottom of the page, where the order is, the weekdays come first in one and the weekdays come second in another? Crazy. We could go on and on and on and on, but these are all the questions that Gemara has right now. Before I get to my last slide, and come back to you. Just one thing to think about. This little sugya here has the Mishnah. It gives us the rules that were selected by the people who codified the Mishnah that says it's not just goring or not goring. Goring has to follow the pattern. If we discern a pattern, the ox is forewarned about the pattern. Then we have Brightot that give us some of those patterns that show how that rule kind of works. And then we have questions. Here are more patterns that have a little problem to it. What do we do about it? You sort of see the progression of the conversation in the Talmud. Lots of sugyot are like this. We start with the rule in the Mishnah. We have other Tannaitic texts that give other versions of the rule, and you paint the picture and the landscape of what's going on here, the legislation. And then as the Gemara digs in, you get lots of questions, and sometimes, it takes off in all kinds of directions from there. Here, the scenarios get more complex, but the structure of this sugya is pretty straightforward, and it's a good place to notice, as you read through a new Mishnah and see what the Gemara is doing, you can see this pattern in lots of places. Sometimes we have a couple opinions that go back and forth, or sometimes an answer is clear, or sometimes we have stories. This time, however, for these questions that we just read, we get a different kind of standard Gemara answer. Teku is the word in Aramaic. These dilemmas shall stand unresolved. If you're a modern Hebrew speaker, or maybe a soccer fan in Israel, or you're an Israeli soccer, a fan of Israeli soccer, not in Israel. Teku in modern language, we used to mean tie, right? So when the soccer game ends 1-1, it's a teku. Sort of means the game stands unresolved because neither team won. But I think tie in sports has a different context a little bit than this, because this isn't necessarily saying there's a tie because we don't even have any opinions here. We just have some questions the Gemara asks that they don't have answers to. And they sort of say, we can't answer them. And they sort of project that we can't answer them, so they're going to stand. They're never going to be answered. You might think later commentators could come and answer them, but lots of tekus sort of stand that way in the literature where 200 years later, someone says, oh, yeah, this is a teku and lets it go. And very rarely have I seen comments to say, wait, this doesn't have to be a teku. Here's how we can decide what to do. But usually it stands for time. But a funny little tradition has grown up in that I'll share with you too, that someone took the letters of teku and made it an acronym, which is not the origin of the word. Teku is related to like lakum, to establish. So it's it actually means this. We've established this debate as unresolved. But the acronym they made it into is Tishbi Yitaretz Kushiot Ubayot. Tishbi, the Tishbite, right, the person from Tishbi, a reference to Eliyahu. One day Eliyahu will come and he'll resolve all the questions and dilemmas we have about the Talmud. Right, Eliyahu is besides a biblical prophet, becomes a mythical character in folklore. He shows up in the Talmud. We've seen him a lot. And the idea is, since he was called up to heaven, he never died, he could come back and visit us on earth. And one day, when he heralds the Messianic era, not only is he going to come and reset the clock for the Messianic era and change life as we know it, he's also going to resolve for us all the dilemmas of the Talmud. I'm not sure I buy that as a literal truth, but it's a nice little story, and I thought I would share that here since we ended with Teku. And that is what I have to say today. If all of these dilemmas made you spin, or you had enough oxes, and you feel like giving me a slap, I'm happy to stick my neck out there to be slapped, but just remember, it's half a dinar fine. All right. 4 minutes left for questions, and I see there's a lot in the chat. Rachel, can you help me sort or choose?
Yeah, let's, we've got one hand, so I'm going to bring Claudette on to ask her question, then we will go to the chat at that point.
All right. Hi, Claudette.
Hello, Rabbi. It's always nice listening to you.
Tell my children.
Is it possible that the rabbis are not so much focusing on the goring ox and Shabbat, but on the human behavior? Because in the Torah, it says the animals should be resting also in Shabbat. So if the act ox is out there goring, that means the human is doing something with that ox that, that they're not supposed to be doing. They should be resting also.
So is this a little bit of critique, right? The ox is supposed to rest too, right? Shabbat is, according to the Torah and the rabbis too, your farm animals should rest on Shabbat. They have the day off. So if I understood you right, you're asking what would cause an ox to gore on Shabbat? It could be like someone
The
went
human must be working. It's not
right.
being Shabbat.
So that could be interesting. I hear in that question the possibility that the ox knows it's Shabbat and knows it has a day off, and the people go out to make it work and it doesn't want to. So it gets all jumpy because it doesn't get its day off. And we have seen, or will see, I'm a little ahead of, pardon me if this is a spoiler alert. We have some stories about smart oxes who show intelligence to be able to, so maybe that will be here as well. It's hard to tell why. I personally found this little scenario odd that we would say this ox always gores on Shabbat and never during the week. It could be the ox is responding to the free time. It could be the ox is responding to someone went to try to make it work and it thinks it's its day off. I don't know if this is really an actual realistic. I'm not enough of a farmhand to know if this is something realistic that the rabbis were dealing with, because it could happen or they're just imagining it. But I guess, Claudette, it is possible that what's really at stake here, someone did something on Shabbat that while the ox was resting to make it unrest. And this is a Shabbat issue more than a going ox issue. That could be a part of it. Interesting question. Thanks.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I think it's often hard, yes, for us to imagine the full reality of the world of the rabbis right, because most of us don't own oxen, right? Or at least I don't.
Right. I would say this is a good masada. When I visit my cousins on their moshav in the Golan, they know stuff about, they've studied a little Talmud, but they know stuff about these things because they see it. Like if you were working in an agricultural context and you were dealing with animals, some of this you would know.
Right.
So
and they didn't have modern fencing, right? So they're right. In the modern world, like animals are always behind some sort of enclosure, even if it's huge. Yeah. But I could imagine, and again, I speak with no authority, just being a person who's thought about this a little bit and might be wrong, that people went out and grazed their animals without barriers up, right? Like a million years ago, I did a master's degree at Harvard Divinity School, and one of the professors in the program had the oldest chair at Harvard, because the Divinity School is like very old institution within the university. And one of the privileges of that chair was that he had permission to graze his cattle, I think on like Boston Commons or Cambridge Commons or something like this, right? It just speaks to a totally different, and that was still on the books, right? That was still on the books. It's totally different world. But you can imagine maybe that, what would he have done? He would have I don't know, a couple hundred years, brought his cattle into the center of town and he had permission to graze them there, but that doesn't mean they were fenced up properly or whatever. Yeah. So we got a couple more questions. Rabbi Goldberg, if you don't mind staying on for a couple minutes, people, if they need to go, can go. Yeah, okay. I can see Leia's got her hand up, and then there's one or two in the chat. Hopefully we can get to it as well. I'll
try to be brief if there are questions and not comments.
I'd like to counter Claudette. I love your commentaries, by the way, Claudette. I think it's fantastic, the things you bring into it. Thank you. Knowing animals, I'm a dog mama. Animals are creatures of routine. And on Shabbat, routine is broken. And maybe the ox is confused and he's not working. And that could be the root of the problem. Not that some human is going against the Shabbat rules, but that the ox is suddenly once a week. What's going on here? I know this from my dog. When we don't go to the doggy club on Monday, and we happen to walk by it, if it isn't meeting, she's going to walk right in there, and she doesn't understand why we're walking by it. And she looks at me like, what is going on? It's Monday. We're supposed to go in there and have some fun. I said, no, we're not meeting today. So I think that's possibly more the problem.
Yeah, nice, nice. That's, I think, the exact comment we needed for this question. Thank you, Leah.
So Robert in the chat says, is this all just an attempt to narrow the Torah's law? What do you think, Rabbi Goldberg?
Oh, that's always a good question, right? We see some things. We'll see. Like, I mean, the classic cases are coming soon about the death penalty or a rebellious child. The rabbis take Torah rules and like really narrow them so that and there's the text show a clear sort of ethical reason why they want to do some of that. I guess I wonder what's at stake here by narrowing what kind of ox becomes forewarned. It raises, then fewer oxes that actually have an incident fewer owners have to pay the full fine. So narrowing the rule helps the pocketbook of ox owners or animal owners. But narrowing the rule, I guess, puts the public more at risk. I guess that's, and that's not the frame the rabbis use in this chapter, but that's sort of some of the tension here, right? A forewarned ox, the owner might think more carefully about protecting the public from, and then by doing so, hopefully there aren't any more cases. It's hard to know. I don't see any attempt here to narrow it or any reason, like with the death penalty, where they make ethical statements about we don't like the death penalty, even though it's on the books. And I wonder, I think the Mishnah today sort of starts with the fact that like there can be patterns for things. Like we can forewarn ox, and that might just be familiarity with animals, right? My ox doesn't like goats, so this ox is forewarned against goats, but it's okay for everybody else. That seems like maybe common sense. When you take it to the more extreme cases of the patterns and the time and the questions they didn't answer, it does get a little silly. So I'm not sure it's an attempt to narrow, but the Gemara might be saying the initial narrowing that we see in the Mishnah, if taken too far, anything, we could look for patterns in all kinds of things to try to narrow it. And that might be the Gemara's point as a whole. Love that question, though. I haven't thought about it. New for me. Thank you.
It's always an interesting question. Yes, we will see that in Sanhedrin, right? Sanhedrin is where the rabbis really narrow the application of the death penalty. Is Ben Serrero Moret, the stubborn and rebellious son, also
that's
in
there
Sanhedrin?
too?
Yes, so that's come up in, a year or so.
It's out there.
But we're making progress, folks. In a couple of weeks, we're going to hit 4 years of doing this. If you've been on this cycle since the beginning, it started January 5th of 2020. And here we are. So, all right. These were all great questions. I'm sorry we can't get to everything, but we should free folks up to continue about their day or night or evening, depending on where they are. Chag Urim Sameach, happy Hanukkah. We light the last lights tonight, or maybe some people on this call have already lit them, depending on where you are. Rabbi Goldberg, you weren't with us last week, but we had a spread where we had people who had already lit and it was past midnight for them. And we had people in California who were still waiting all day to light the first Hanukkah light. So it was really, really an amazing geographic spread. Okay.
We'll have more light this Hanukkah, wherever we are.
Yes. Lovely to see everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for bringing these texts and discussing them with us. And we will see you next week. Bye.
Take care, everybody.